The lead up to the playoffs is always exciting as you have teams jockeying for a position and fighting and battling over seeding, right? But there's always that team in the playoffs that their playoffs end disappointingly or early that could and probably should look to blow up their rosters. On today's episode, I have 4 teams that I'm going to discuss that I feel like should look to blow up their roster if their season does not end in the championship. We're going to talk about it all and more right after this.
Welcome to the number one place for your daily basketball news and analysis, NBA Central.
What's going on, basketball fans? Welcome to another episode of NBA Central, your number one spot for everything basketball related. I'm the host, Hayes, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at NBA Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that said, let's go ahead and get into it for today, y'all. And I want to start this one off talking about, well, the main topic of this one are 4 teams I feel like should absolutely look to blow it up, or could look to blow it up, should, depending on how the perspective you have on the team, blow up their roster and make a major change if their season ends disappointingly. And, you know, we're looking at this one, right? Especially if they end with a fast playoff exit. The first team I want to talk about is the Milwaukee Bucks. I think that the Milwaukee Bucks, you look at the changes that the Bucks made just a little over a year ago, right? Like, this is a team that made a big swing to bring Damian Lillard into the Milwaukee Bucks, and they made another swing at the trade deadline, not a huge swing, but try to kind of refine their roster more, sending out Chris Middleton, bringing in Kyle Kuzma. And while Giannis is having what could very well be looked at as an MVP caliber season in most seasons, he's going to be probably third on the list of MVP voting behind Jokic and Shea, who are both having amazing seasons, right? But if you look at the Bucks, right, and if they have an early season playoff exit again, right, and you look at the way that team has fallen since the 2021 season, they're going to have to look to do something. And Giannis is going to be one of the reasons why. Giannis has already said that he wants to be competing for a title. As long as he feels like he's competing for a title, he's locked in with the Milwaukee Bucks. He's not going to look to go anywhere. So that puts pressure on the organization to always keep trying to refine and improve their team. And you can't have going on early season exits and just rest on having the same team. And that's where the Milwaukee Bucks sit currently, or could possibly sit at the end of this if their season ends early. Now, one can say if the Milwaukee Bucks go on some type of crazy run or anything like that, maybe make it to an ECF, which that'd be a very solid run for them to be able to do that. All right, maybe then you can stave off making major changes for another year. But I think when you look at this Milwaukee Bucks team, when you look at their tax bill, things like that, yes, they got under the second tax apron, which is huge for them. They're right now slated to be $28 million below the first tax apron next year and $40 million below the second tax apron. So they're actually going to be able to aggregate salaries. They're going to be able to combine salaries. They can actually start trying to will and deal out there this offseason because they're not going to be a second tax apron team. But if their season comes to an end, I think the major changes could be looking to be had by the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, they do have the first round pick if it's 5 through 30. From Brooklyn. We'll see if that happens, right? But other than that, they can't trade any of their own future first until I think 2032, I believe is the first time that they can trade one of their own first round picks. So because of that, like, it's going to have to be contracts. It's going to have to be, things like that. And we'll see where the Milwaukee Bucks end up sitting. But they are a team that I absolutely think should look to make major changes to their roster, maybe even blow up the whole thing. And again, by blow up, it's different meaning for each team. Maybe that's not the right wording to use there, but it's kind of a flashy word to use. The next up is the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, this may be a surprise here to have the Clippers here. Their season has been tremendous. You look at what they've been able to do with Kawhi being in and out of that lineup, the players that they've had step up and have big seasons for them. It's all been great. But then when you look at the Clippers, they're still a team that right now is going to have to go through the plan. They're the 8 seed right now, right? And if for some reason, and I think that this is the specific scenario with the Clippers, which we don't know how much of a worry this is going to be, but if they somehow do not make it out that play-in tournament, I think the Clippers have to make some major changes to that roster. It's been a fun story to talk about them. It's been a fun story to talk about a lot of their players and how the season that James Harden's having, as far as like a renaissance in a way that James Harden's having for that team. How Norman Powell stepped up for the team and he's really progressed, probably on pace for the most improved player of the year award. I don't really know if anybody else comes close to making the case that he has for most improved player, especially how he's leading that team in scoring, right? Even above James Harden, definitely above Kawhi Leonard, and especially with Kawhi only playing 23 games this year. But this is a team that if they somehow, right, and this is the nature of the play-in, right? For some teams, it is a sign of things moving up. If some teams are in the play-in, though, it's a sign of them maybe stagnating a little bit too much, right? And you look at the Clippers, they have some really good stories on them. Norman Powell's a good story for them. Derrick Jones Jr. is a good story for them. Chris Dunn's a good story for them, right? They've had a lot of players come in there and reclaim their careers in a lot of ways, and that's great. And Derrick Jones Jr. not reclaiming his career. He just had a finals run with the Dallas Mavericks, but, coming to that team, and he's still been a good story over that time. But then you look at other things with it, right? They got Bogdanovich on that team at a $17 million contract, $16 million next season that they could look to move. Not to say that necessarily he's been terrible for that team, but he's played 13 games and averaging 11 points right over that time. So, he's a contract that they can look to move, right? They can look to do something with him. So, Nicholas Batum had a really good game a couple of games ago, but again, 36 years old. So, the Clippers sit in a position as well where we know that Steve Ballmer is ready to spend any money necessary to make that team. They're not near the second tax apron, which is really good for that team where they can have still some flexibility, and they even have as much as some cap space going into next season, right? So this is a Clippers team but if they do not make it out the play-in, it just makes sense kind of where they are to kind of make some major moves and some changes to their roster, but that's specifically where I'm looking at it at, right? I think with everything going on in that team, if they're able to make it, if they make it out of the first round, I think it's a really good thing for them. They are a really good team. Make no mistake about it, right? And the Clippers have some things, but I think if you may look to just you need to continue to strengthen for it, right? And I think I honestly, not even looking at the other pieces on the team, if this team does not make it out the play-in, I would honestly be looking to move Kawhi. And I know that's something that they're probably not willing or ready to do at this point in time, but it is something that I think that should at least be considered. Is potentially moving on from Kawhi Leonard. Again, I know that I don't know if that's like a buzz thing to say, a wrong thing to say or not, but I definitely think it is something that you may have to look at when it's all said and done here. The next team that I think that I want to have on this list is the Sacramento Kings. Now, the Kings, part of the reason that they acquired Zach LaVine in that deal is that they didn't want to have to go through a complete rebuild. They didn't want to have to go through a complete rebuild of the roster, right? And while the Kings have had some damn good games over the stretch, make no mistake about it, and there's some times where it looks like, hey, we could just make the right moves here and there, this team could be something, right? Yeah, you don't have any player that's as good as De'Aaron Fox. People already question was Sabonis actually going to end up being the best player on that team. And you have depth here, right? You have some things that could be working on it. But then again, you got to look at the pieces as well. You got Zach LaVine. And while Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan are going to have their moments together. Look, they did it with the Bulls for 3 years. They've had their moments together. DeMar DeRozan's 35 years old, and it's a much different proposition to have DeMar DeRozan paired with 26, 27-year-old De'Aaron Fox than 30-year-old Zach LaVine. But again, maybe that's something that the Kings are ready and willing to kind of equip and go through, and maybe Keegan Murray steps up. They got other players as well, young players on that roster that they could be looking to take a step up next year, right? You got Devin Carter, who you drafted. That's still a young player on that team at 22 years old, even though he's a little bit of an older rookie, right? You got Keegan Murray at 24 years old. You got some players here that still you could be looking and saying, well, as these players rise and other players decline, maybe we'll be fine there. But I think that if the Kings, right, and I know right now they're in that play-in area of the playoffs, if the Kings have a first-round exit, God forbid somehow they don't, a first-round exit may be okay for all the changes that team has had. But if this team does not make it out the play-in for some reason, I think that the Kings could be looking to make some moves to will and deal to trade. That this roster could look very different. Now, the question is how difficult would it be to move? You got Zach LaVine at a $47 million contract. I don't think they're going to look to move on from him. His market already wasn't the best, right? Which is, how the Bulls weren't able to move him earlier. You got DeMar DeRozan at 24, Malik Monk at $18 million, Jonas Valanciunas at $10 million, right? So you got some wiggle room that you can have with some players here if you want to get a little bit creative. The Kings also have the benefit right now of not being anywhere near the second tax apron. They're actually going to be $30 million below the first apron next year. So they actually got some actual cap space that they can actually wiggle room with, use their exceptions, things like that. But I think some major changes could be coming to the Kings roster as well, just to make the midseason, the change they made at the trade deadline and that roster fit a little bit together. So structural moves there for the Kings that could be there. But it is another player that, or another teams that I think you could look out for to make some big moves here, depending on how their season ends. And then, of course, the biggest one, the one that's no surprise, no shock to anyone, is the Phoenix Suns. It's even came out that the Phoenix Suns, if they can't go on a playoff run, they're going to be looking to trade Kevin Durant. We talked about yesterday them trading Kevin Durant or Devin Booker. Big changes are coming to the Phoenix Suns. Now, those changes could be very difficult. And we talked about that on yesterday's show. The Suns' possibility of moving Durant, moving Booker, right? It gets so restricted because they are a second tax apron team. Even next year, I think over $60 million into the second tax apron. That's a large tax bill that's coming there for the Sacramento Kings, right? I'm sorry, for the Phoenix Suns. And so the Suns can make a precursor move. That's really what it would have to come down to, is that if they can make a move to dump off some salary first to get to beneath the second tax apron, right? So they right now are slated to be $11 million above the first tax apron in the offseason, right? And so you're looking at if they can move Grayson Allen, if they can find someone to take Grayson Allen's contract, that right there frees that up, right? That frees them up to do that, right? Royce O'Neal gets them a long part of the way there, but not quite. He's a $10 million contract. So they would have to look to do something. If they can find somebody, a taker for Grayson Allen, that frees up a lot for that team, right? And so that's going to be what the Kings look to do first. If they can do that, it makes, even if they want to move on from KD, even if they want to move on from Devin, it makes it so much. I don't think the Suns, keep saying the Kings, the Suns are going to find any type of move, right, that makes it make sense for them to try to reconstruct things around what they already have. But I think that they can try to make a precursor move and then make the big move and then really reshape their roster. Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, 2 out of those 3 guys could be gone next year. And like I've said before, I get why they want to try to rebuild around Devin Booker. I get it. At 28 years old, he's the guy that they drafted. They haven't really had a lot of luck with their draft history. You want to try to hold on to a guy like Devin Booker if you can, but I just don't see a world in which they're able to put something around Devin Booker in enough time. He has 3 years left on his contract after this. Unless you make a move this offseason where you feel like you're going to be right back able to not just be a playing team, but be a playoff team with the chance, a legitimate chance of winning a first round or getting to the second round, I just don't see you having the runway to where it makes sense to hold on to Devin Booker. Their avoidance of being willing to completely blow this thing up could be what ends up hurting them most in the long run. Because don't let Devin Booker get hurt. Don't let him have a bad season, right? So the Suns have to ask themselves some really tough questions about what the next stage of their franchise is this offseason. But I just think that coming out of that, man, it's going to be, if they're honest with themselves, they need to be willing to completely blow this thing up. That's just my personal opinion. I think they really need to be willing to blow it completely up from top to bottom and just see where the chips fall at that point in time to see if they can get enough assets back to try to move some things. But that's my point. That's where I stand on a lot of these teams. There's some other teams that could be, right? Look at possibilities. The Dallas Mavericks, maybe, right? But you don't know what Nico Harrison's going to do. Seems like he's really convinced that, getting Anthony Davis and then being able to build something around that to where I think Nico Harrison is delusional enough to feel like he can really put together another championship team here sooner rather than later. But maybe the Dallas Mavericks are another team. If you want to flip to the Eastern Conference, the Miami Heat are the team that I'm looking at right there, other than the Milwaukee Bucks, so I have a course higher up, that if the Miami Heat can't make it out that play-in tournament, that maybe Pat Riley will finally wake up and realize, hey, as much as I try to avoid us not being outwardly bad, that may be what's best. I don't think Tyler Hero and Bam are going to be good long-term fits together. You got Khalil Ware there. You got Jaime Jaquez there. You got some young players that make some sense for you right now. But the question is that what's the real runway to be able to win and compete with those players? And I don't like Pat Riley is so into not wanting to be bad, right? And if you tell him that there's a glimpse, that there's a chance, he is not going to want to be bad. So, and I respect that to a degree. Right? Let me make sure I respect that, right? Like, it's too many teams that I think just pack it in and are too ready to accept being a bad team. And so some of it I commend for it. Like, but you got Nikola Jovic there as well, I didn't mention, he's having a really solid season this year. He just has to find a way to stay healthy. But we'll see. But let me know down below. Which teams do you think are a possibility to blow it up or make major changes to the roster depending on how their postseason ends? Let me know what you guys think on all that. Make sure you guys are following us at NBA Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns. NBA Central Show basketballmove@gmail.com. And then lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, 773-270-2799. We're the number one spot for everything basketball related, but that's thanks to you lovely and beautiful people. And like I like to end every episode on, see you guys the next time I feel like making a video. Probably tomorrow. Peace, y'all.
This has been a presentation of the Breaks Media.